Hello, hello. Today I am joined by none other than FINNEAS, who you know. He's a singer and songwriter and record producer. He has collaborated a great deal with his amazing sister, Billie Eilish, and he has his debut solo EP, Blood Harmony, which came out in the fall. FINNEAS, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Do you remember when you learned that voting was a thing as a kid?
I think the first election that I remember being aware of was George Bush's re-election. I remember sort of like that being on in my parents' house and in my friend's parents' house. And I remember, candidly, my parents not being super pleased that he was being reelected. And I remember sort of being like, why? And what is all of this? And my parents, to their great credit, never sort of babied me or Billy in terms of like assuming we wouldn't understand something. If we ever asked a question, they would just explain it, and if we didn't understand it, then we didn't, but they would always explain everything. So I remember that. The other thing that I remember was the first march I went to, which was against the Iraq War after 9/11, which I would have been like 4 or 5 during that. So that was the first march I remember. But so pretty early on, in a kind of an abstract sense of like, okay, there is a government. And
Did you then, if you were going to marches early, I imagine you probably were encouraged to register pretty much when you turned 18.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely registered when I turned 18. I turned 18 in 2015, so not really an election year. But yes, I mean, that was, I was sort of politically conscious in terms of just what was going on from the time I was like 8, 9.
Yeah. Do you remember what it felt like when you voted the first time?
I think it's important to just be honest here and say that the first time I voted, and to this day, I'm mostly just hoping I don't get anything wrong. I think that's probably a big factor in maybe kids' reticence to vote, is that it's marginally confusing and it's not something we've done a whole lot of, and you're in a voting booth alone and you don't want to make a mistake. It felt reminiscent of like a driver's ed test or something to me.
Yeah.
It's always been important to me to write down who I'm going to vote for everyone beforehand, and cross-reference their policies online and make sure that I'm never guessing in the booth.
Yeah, that's always a terrifying moment when you get in the booth and you see an initiative or an office and you're like, I didn't remember seeing anything about this. It's a terrible feeling.
The other thing is, like, if you've spent months talking about, how much you hope that this governor or mayor or president is elected, and you get in the booth and there's just the choice. And you always have this feeling of like, oh my God, what if I just accidentally chose not the person I've been talking about for months,
Since you are so active and really smart about making sure you have information at hand, I am presuming that you probably also make sure to vote in your local elections as well as the big 4-year.
Yeah. I mean, I think hopefully part of the thing that has resonated with the Black Lives Matter moment and movement, specifically against police brutality in the United States, is how much impact these local elections have. I think presidential elections, gubernatorial elections are pretty publicized, and I think sometimes local elections are like sort of swept under the rug. Sometimes, frankly, because the person that is more likely to get elected is relying on not having, either the youth vote or the vote of a person who can't afford to take a day off work to go to the poll. So it's super important, and I try to be as vocal as I can about how important local elections. I mean, in terms of, quite honestly, the presidential election matters a great deal because the cabinet matters and because the staffing matters. But in terms of your actual daily life in whatever town, city, state you are in, like, your local election matters tenfold. Like, you should not be voting for president if you're not also going to then vote for every local election.
You mentioned before that it can be daunting, particularly for young people that haven't voted a lot before. What do you think is the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome in terms of activating those younger voters to make sure that they get registered and get to the polls or mail in their ballot?
I think that's an awesome question. I live in a sort of a historically blue state. And one of the things I think about really often is that there's this kind of misconception that California specifically, or maybe a state like New York, or maybe a state like Texas in the inverse climate, is this sort of throwaway. It's already, it's predetermined. And I think that the predetermined nature of that has much more to do with the people that have voted consistently for the past 20, 30 years. And, to put it kind of bluntly, like, politicians are trying to get elected, and they are trying to get elected by the people within the district that they are running or within the state that they are running. And I think that if you make yourself known as a voter that they will have to win over, you will create politicians who cater more to your desires. I think if you refuse to play the game and refuse to, say that you are going to vote in any election, then they are dismissing you. They're dismissing your interests. They're dismissing your desires, your needs. And I think if you say, I'm a voter, my friends are voters, my family is a voter, here are the things that we want to see, and we will vote for you. You'll really enact change in terms of who is running and upon what platform they run. So that's my advice to kids, is just like, the more you declare yourself a member of the active voting populace, then the more people will reflect what you want reflected. I think that's part of the misconception, is people thinking like, well, I don't want to vote for these two people. And it's like, well, but you're just starting because you're now declaring yourself a voter. And so then 4 years from now or 8 years from now, you'll have candidates that really reflect you.
You mentioned one of your earliest memories being watching election returns come in as a kid. Do you have any rituals around like the election day now? Do you tend to watch polls come in with friends? Do you like to be by yourself? Do you just stay away and look the next day?
The first thing that I try to do, I usually sign up for absentee ballots, and I try to vote early, either by mail or, sometimes, especially in the city that I grew up in, you can actually literally go cast your vote at 2 days early or something. I always try to do that because life is life, and you just never know what might befall you on the actual one day of election. You might get into a car accident that day, and I just want to make sure that I have done the thing that I want to do, which is participate and vote. So usually election day itself, I'm not voting because I have already voted, which again just brings me peace of mind. And yeah, I mean, I have good and bad memories of election days. I think everybody does, depending on who they wanted to be elected either way. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the 2020 election on November 3rd and what I'm supposed to do that day. And I think the hours leading up to polls closing, I'll be using my platform to just encourage every person to go vote. So that'll be the first 2/3 of my day. And then the last third, I might just turn off all the TVs and play bananagrams or something. But in a very, that's how I feel sometimes about, anything of that nature, anything that's that kind of, live intensity. The last election that I lived through, I basically had no platform. And now that I have a platform, I have a feeling of that's what I'm going to try to do, is just encourage anyone to go vote.
I'm glad that you brought up your platform, because I'm curious what your main talking point is. What is the one thing that you want to tell people to make sure that they understand how important this right and this privilege and this responsibility is?
Well, okay, so let's extrapolate to just voting. It is the legal right of an American citizen to vote, and I think that is worth exercising. And part of the reason it's worth exercising is if you exercise it and you really follow your heart on that, it's not a right that'll get taken away. I think the less people that vote, the easier it will be to change rights like that. I think there are so many forms of activism and protest that are wonderful and effective, and I think that in some ways voting is actually the easiest. And I think that should not be discounted. I think if you want to walk down a boulevard holding a sign with thousands of people chanting for 6 hours, that's amazing. And then just take the extra 5 minutes it will take to also go to a polling place and vote for, who you think will do a better job. I feel like it's just not that hard. And that would be my sort of, encouragement to people, is if you care about these issues enough to voice your opinion in any other way, here is a direct and fast way to articulate that and, cast your name, in one direction or the other.
Perfect. Phineas, thank you so much for sharing your incredibly informed point of view on activism and on what it really means to take that extra step. It's super important, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And, I think it's worth mentioning too, sometimes people can be a little preachy in my position, that I'm daily inspired by people younger than I am, and by how active the young people specifically, are online. And I feel like I understand what it feels like to be a person who's being remonstrated for something that they're already doing. And I want anyone listening to this who is an active person and is registered and is going to vote and is going to protest, I want them to know that I'm not actually talking to them. They're already doing what they can. And so, yeah, this is me encouraging someone who maybe feels uninformed or uninspired.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Did you like that video? You can check out more over here. And don't forget to subscribe to iHeart right here. And if you're already a longtime fan, make sure you ring the bell down below so you don't miss a single video. Bye guys.